Dan Mulhall, Ambassador, good morning.
Good morning to you.
Thanks very much for joining us.
Good to be here.
Thank you very much. A few quick fire questions. I haven't hit you with these questions yet, so you can plead the fifth if you want. Question 1, how strict were your parents?
I grew up in a very wonderfully loving family. My parents were strict enough, but not overly so. I mean, we had a happy childhood. I spent last night with my 5 siblings. We had dinner together with our respective spouses, and we were reminiscing about our childhood. It was a very good childhood, and I think all of us benefited greatly from our parents' guidance of our lives.
Question 2, fish or meat?
I'm a fish man more and more, actually. Yeah. I mean, obviously, when I was growing up, it was meat during the week and fish on Friday. But that's kind of changed a bit, and I'm now inclined to go for the fish option whenever the opportunity arises.
Question 3, your worst teacher and why? You're probably not going to be allowed to say a name.
Oh my goodness, I couldn't possibly. No, there were a few of my lecturers at university. I wouldn't be happy to name them, but who were, I think, underpowered and who left me unimpressed. But at Mount Sion, I have to say, I was very happy with the quality of tuition that I got from there. I was back in Mount Sion recently. I met Brother Gleeson, who taught me in primary school, and he's still there. It was great to connect with him again because I owe a lot to Brother Gleeson because he really did help me to get on to the next stage of my education.
And that was my next question. Who was your favourite teacher and why? And Brother Gleeson would be...
Well, Brother Gleeson was one, and then there was Sean Crowe, who was our teacher in secondary school, and he gave us all an appreciation for literature beyond the narrow confines of the curriculum, and I think I've taken that interest with me around the world over the last 40 years.
Did you have a favourite toy growing up?
I think my tricycle. I had a tricycle at one stage, which I really liked for some reason. I had it for a long time. But, I don't remember. I mean, I certainly, when I see my grandchildren now and the number of toys they get at Christmas, it's a different world today from the one we grew up in. But we always had plenty. I mean, my family, we weren't, my father had a good job and my mother was a great homemaker. And we had a very happy family life, and we got a good number of presents at Christmas, but not like today where kids seem to get endless amounts of Christmas presents.
2 more to go. If you could time travel, where would you go to?
I think I would go to early 20th century Ireland on the eve of our political transformation. I've been fascinated by that period in our history. I've written about it. I've read about it extensively. And I just find the whole thing, like, how do we go from being this relatively contented part of the United Kingdom in the late 19th century to being this kind of revolutionary hotbed in the second decade of the 20th century. It's all a mystery, and I spent my life trying to understand it, and it would be nice to go back there and see it for myself. With
that in mind, were you surprised with the recent controversy regarding commemorations of the RIC and then subsequently people talking about the Black and Tans?
Well, when I was in London during the 1916 commemorations, and I made a point of commemorating both the Easter Rising and the Battle of the Somme. And I remember actually on 2 days in 2016 in London, I did a Somme event in the morning and an Easter Rising event in the evening. I remember I laid a wreath at the Somme commemoration in Manchester, on that day, the anniversary of the Battle of the Somme. And that evening, I was over at the University of Liverpool giving a lecture about the Easter Rising. And I thought that combination was perfect, that you could recognise all strands of the Irish experience.
I know you're very good at answering questions and deflecting questions, deflecting answers. You did that very well. So maybe you're not able to comment because you are hamstrung in your job about commenting about certain aspects of even history. So, for example, talking about the Black and Tans is a difficult thing for an ambassador to talk about, maybe.
Well, look, I frequently give lectures in the United States. In fact, in April, I'm going to Boston College for a big conference on revolutionary Ireland, and I'll be giving a talk there. I haven't written my lecture yet, but I'm going to call it 2020 Vision, Ireland 1920, Then and Now. but I haven't quite worked out yet how I'm going to address that issue. But I will address it. I think it's important that we should face up to our history and be honest about our history and not try to, bob and weave and avoid issues. I think we should confront issues, because I think that's the best way to come to terms with your history, is to see it in the round rather than just look at the bits you like.
And again, in phrasing my question first, I didn't ask whether you agreed with how the Black and Tans were to be commemorated or anything like that. I asked.
But I don't think there was ever any intention of commemorating the Black and Tans. I think it was the RIC and the Dublin Metropolitan Police.
Were you surprised that the controversy became such a political, heated, national debate? It literally sprung out of nowhere.
Yeah, it did surprise me, because we have gone through a number of years now. I mean, I was the first Irish ambassador to lay a wreath at the Cenotaph in London when I did so in 2014. I did it in 2015 and 2016 as well. I laid a wreath at the Somme Memorial Service in Manchester, as I mentioned. So, and I also commemorated the Easter Rising in London and in different parts of Britain. And I was able to do that without any kind of feeling that I was treading on awkward ground. I mean, for example, in 2016, I had a commemoration of Roger Caseman's execution in London at the embassy and at the cathedral.
And yet, sorry for interrupting, commemorating 1916 and commemorating the Irish that fought during the Battle of the Somme, and I was over at Ypres. I've done nationwide pieces about this. We've seen the wall in Dungarvan with all the names. A bit easier in the sense that once we embrace this idea of inclusivity, and we had the Queen over and laying the wreath, but once we get to the Civil War, I'm a great student of history myself, and the Civil War is still such a difficult thing to talk about for so many people. It's still raw because there's still political divisions on this island, even within the 26 counties. So I think it's one that we're still going to have difficulty over the next 2 or 3 years in commemorating. How we do that, I don't know. I genuinely don't know, and I don't think the government knows.
Well, look, all I can say is that our track record to date, since 2013, when the Decade of Commemoration started,
has been good.
Is very positive. It's very good. I mean, I have to confess that there were people in London who said to me in late 2015, early 2016, are you sure this Easter Rising thing is not going to lead to a surge in violence? And I said, no, I believe we're doing this in a very balanced and sensible way, and that it will pay dividends. And it did pay dividends, in that there was no negativity in Britain about the Easter Rising. And likewise, people in Ireland accepted the idea that we had part of our history that ran through the battlefields of the Somme. I took the view, and I said this unambiguously, the main strand in Irish history goes through the General Post Office in 1916, but there are other strands, and we shouldn't ignore those strands. But we should recognise that the main strand leads on to Irish independence, goes through the GPO in 1916. And I think as long as you make that clear, to me anyway, that was the most important insight that I had, was that if you recognise the main strand and its relevance and its importance, you could then also acknowledge the other strands that came together at that time. And I remember in 2016, I wrote a piece for The Guardian called The Two Thomases, about Thomas MacDonagh and Tom Kettle. They were contemporaries. They were both lecturers in UCD, both literary scholars, both men of letters. One of them was executed in 1916 in Dublin for his part in the Easter Rising. The other one died on the Somme. You could easily have reversed those two stories. It must have been a very tight call for Tom Kettle, whether he went to war or not. And likewise, it must have been a very tight call for Thomas MacDonagh to decide to become a member of the IRB and to engage in a rebellion which he must have known was likely to result in his death. And
that silence that so many families suffered and endured for decades. The Collins family here in Waterford City, with 5 brothers having fought and died in the British Army for Irish freedom, they were thinking, and for That's now been expunged in so many respects. The problem we still have is that, in a way, the British left Ireland in 1921-22, the 26 counties, Free State as it became known. So it's kind of easier to do, whereas those two brothers could well have become a member of the RIC and also a member then of the IRA, joined the Free State. My father's from Leitrim. There was relations of his that were either side families. That's why it's just a little bit more difficult. And I know we're not going to sort it here today because there's still... It's the first time we've had to commemorate the War of Independence because as a nation, we've never done it. In 1966, we commemorated 1916 in a different way, a very nationalistic way. So commemorations are also a zeitgeist of the era. But this is the first time.
But
that's why it's so difficult.
I'm still sifting this stuff myself, right?
Yeah.
I'm actually reading now about 1919, 1920 in a way that I probably never did before. And I'm sifting it and I'm trying to make sense of it all and trying to form a judgment. And I hope that that's what we'll do collectively as a nation, rather than occupying particular positions, that we will have an open mind and we'll look at what happened and we'll try to weigh it up and judge its significance for then and for now.
I think we're going to make mistakes, and I don't think it's going to, I think it'll be 5 years' time when we're looking back on how we commemorate it that we'll realise how we appraised it. Because the current politics will come into it, but also our inability to grasp the necessity of doing exactly what you're saying. And I can't say, I don't think we're mature enough yet.
Well, I think
we're getting there.
I have to say, I believe we've shown great maturity over the last 5 years since the start of the serious commemoration process, and I'm convinced that we'll get there over the next few years as well. There'll be bumps, there'll be humps and hollows on the road, but I think we're now, we're a country now with a lot of people who have the ability, the education, the nous to look at the past and make up their own minds about it, rather than being forced into kind of particular points of view which they'll never be capable of moving from. I think people in Ireland are now a lot more open-minded than we ever were before.
I know, but it's still the Civil War. And this is the thing, it's still the...
Well, that's a matter for...
bloody Civil War.
Well, that's a matter for 3 years' time. So I think we should get over 2020 and 2021 first before we move on to the complexities of the Civil War.
And my final personal question, Yeats or Keats?
Well, definitely Yeats, because apart from anything else, I am the honorary president of the Yeats Society. I was appointed there last month, so if I said Keats, I think I'd be in serious trouble with the Yeats Society in Sligo. No, look, I mean, Yeats is part of our heritage. He relates to all the issues that we're talking about now in the decade of commemoration. He wrote about every single one of them.
Yeah, I was reading his I love his poetry.
Yeah.
I'm a student of English as well in college and UCD, and his poetry on the Civil War, again, a little bit more confused than his poetry on 1916 and fumbling in the greasy tail and all those things.
Yeah.
The Civil War was such more difficult.
Well, what is it? The heart's grown brutal from the fair. He talks about, more substance in our enmities than in our love. So he's actually making an appeal for love to prevail over enmity. And that's, of course, what James Joyce does as well in Ulysses, where in the Cyclops chapter, he talks about the opposite of hate is love. And he's kind of making the argument in favour of coming together and respecting each other rather than taking hostile positions towards each other. So look,
I wish Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael had read a lot more Yeats over the last 100 years.
Well, I mean, look, I'm a great... I tell you, let me give you an example of... I was in India in 1982. I was at a lunch with the grandmother of an Indian friend of mine I met, and her grandmother was Nehru's sister. And when I went to that lunch, her grandmother, when she discovered I was Irish, recited 2 Yeats poems by heart. And for me, that was a moment of revelation. If the most powerful and famous family in India of the 20th century knew their Yeats by heart, I should take Yeats seriously too. And she recited those poems, and all the family joined in. They all knew the poems. I asked her, Mrs. Pandit, that was her name, how did you learn those poems? She said, I learned them when I was interned by the British during our independence struggle, and I've never forgotten them.
Who do we have in the room with you here at the present?
Well, we have my colleague, Frank Bradley, who's from Donegal, who's a member of our Department of Foreign Affairs, who's here to assist me in my visit to Waterford today to visit 3 schools. And we have Sergeant Shane Coughlin from the 3rd Infantry Division based in Kilkenny, but a Cappoquin man. So 2 Waterford men come back home and a Donegal man helping us to make sure we don't go astray.
Do you like what you're doing this week? Do you like visiting the schools?
I love it.
Questions and
I love it.
Why are you doing it? You're explaining. It's part of this initiative to explain to people about the importance of DFA, Department of Foreign Affairs.
Look, we have this Global Ireland policy now. And the aim of the policy is to double our footprint in the world between now and 2026, which means opening new embassies. It means being more active in peacekeeping at the UN and so forth. Why are we doing that? We're doing it because we're a different country today from the country I started representing in India in 1980. At that time, we had 25 embassies. Today we have 90 missions around the world. In 5 years' time, we'll have over 100. And we're not doing that because we like having more embassies. We're doing it because Ireland is a globally connected country. We have trade with every part of the world. We have investment links. And we have a vested interest in the world as it is and in trying to move global affairs in the right direction. And that's why, for example, we're now bidding strongly for a seat on the Security Council for the years 2021-2022. I'm optimistic that we will succeed. The election is in June of this year, and it would be wonderful if...
Do you have a candidate?
No. This is Ireland.
Yes.
Ireland is looking for a seat. There are 5 permanent members. There are 5 permanent members of the Security Council, which is Russia, China, France, Britain, and the United States. And then there are 10 temporary members who serve 2-year terms. And we would like to serve a 2-year term on the centenary of Irish independence in 2022. So that's why we're bidding now. We're saying we've been 100 years as an independent country. We want to play our role in global affairs to mark the centenary of Irish independence. And because we have interests and we have values, and we have to promote those values, we have to defend those interests. And that's why we now have this Global Ireland policy. And we want to go to schools around the country. And, I did get questions this morning. Why do we send soldiers around the world on peacekeeping duties? Why do we give 700 million euros a year in development aid? Why do we have 90 embassies? We have that because we are a global country. We're a country that has a stake in the international environment, and we have to play our part. And the Global Ireland policy involves playing that part more actively and putting more resources into our international efforts.
I can't let you go, gentlemen, without talking briefly about the Cappoquin connections. Tell us about the Cappoquin connections.
Well, I suppose, my name is Shane Coughlin. I'm from Cappoquin. I'm serving in the 3rd Infantry Battalion in Kilkenny. I'm along today with Dan just to highlight, I suppose, to the schools the importance, I suppose, of the Irish UN peacekeeping overseas, which has gone on since 1958 now at this stage, so 61 years. It's a long, long time. So I suppose something as a nation we're very, very proud of. It's great to come to the schools in Waterford, being a Cappoquin man, so it's great to be down in Waterford doing the schools today with Dan. So,
and who's down in Cappoquin? Tell us who's the family down there.
Well, I suppose you'd probably know my aunt, Nora Flynn. She was a former councillor, so that'd be the most popular one to you, I suppose. And look, there's plenty more.
Plenty up there, yeah, plenty out there, more. Absolutely. Well, hello to all of them down there. Dan, finally, what's the meaning of life? What are we here for?
Well, I think...
Are we going to go to heaven and hell?
I think we're here to to do the best we
can.
Make the world
a better place, yeah.
To make the world a better place for ourselves, for our families, and for the communities in which we live. And I think I always remind people that, we're all Irish. We're also from particular places in Ireland, whether it be a parish or a town like Cabbaquin or a place like Waterford. And nobody owes us a living. Nobody around the world has any obligation towards us. Our only obligation is towards ourselves. So we've got to do the best we can. And I've no illusions, right? I can't change the world, right? What I can do in my time in Washington is be the best ambassador for Ireland I can be in Washington for the next number of years. When I was in Germany during the economic crisis, I knew I wasn't going to solve the economic crisis, but I could run the best possible embassy for Ireland in Germany and try to get the message out that Ireland wasn't a hopeless case, that we were going to come back, and we have come back. So you can only do what you can do. You can be the best at what you're doing, and you have to see yourself as part of a collective and hope that the collective will somehow move in the right direction. But there's no point in sitting back and complaining. I see a lot of people now on social media bitterly complaining about everything. I say, stop complaining. Yeah. Do something. Yeah. Do something small yourself.
Yeah, they have to be outraged about something.
Yeah, look, outrage is fine. It's important in some respects to get things done. But the important thing is for people to do things that are constructive rather than complain in a destructive way.
Ambassador, gentlemen, thank you very much.
No fault to Roach. Thank you.
And a few texts. Damien, can you ask Dan to contact, how do we contact him regarding issues in the USA? I believe through his office, an email to the American Embassy and through to the Irish Embassy. Damien, well said about the commemoration. Many of those that were remembered were Irish men who took one side over the other, just like what others did, died in struggles and still do today, regardless of what side people took. They are some mother's sons or daughters, just as we are today. Damien, I love the American judge's comment. The power of love is much more important than the love of power. Damien, how can we move on? Maturity, TDs, leaders in Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael continuing to knock Sinn Féin at every opportunity in the Dáil by bringing up the past with nasty low digs and blame them for bringing down Stormont. Damien, can you please play Come Out You Black and Tans for all the people there? Johnny O'Connor, good morning.
Good morning.
You give us an old blast at the Wolf Tones. Go on.
It's actually number one.
I know it is, yeah. Well, we four here now. Liz, good morning. Liz Reddy.
In both Britain and
Mary Francis. We've got a band here now, lads. The four of you, the five of us. We'll give an old one. Okay, ready. 1, 2, 3. Now, that was a lovely rendition of Black and Tans. Well done, Mary Francis. Excellent. Good singing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mary Francis Ryan, editor of the Waterford News and Star. Thanks very much for joining us. Kieran Foley, are you news editor now in the Munster Express?
Suppose you could call me that, Damien, yeah.
Okay, we'll get you a pay rise straight away.
Yeah,
Kieran,
exactly.
if you're listening, a pay rise please for Kieran. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Johnny O'Connor, formerly of the Munster Express, still doing columns with the Munster Express, Tales of the Tellurians, and also working with RT in the regional roundup every Friday, and long time commentator on politics. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And Liz Reddy, head of news and current affairs here, news editor with
I just
WLR.
Got a promotion.
You got a promotion as well. Pay rises for everybody.
Thank you.
We're going to talk about politics. We've got 20 minutes to talk about politics and the political scene. We're just talking off air about the idea of when the election might be called. We're not going to go into it in too much depth, Mary Francis, but the latest we're hearing is possibly April, May, is it?
Yeah, it seems to be April, May. I think it looks now like February is going to be off the cards, but it'll depend on Fianna Fáil. Fine Gael won't want an election this early at this stage. Too many controversies.
But you could see them, some of the politicians getting ready. Even last night, I saw Eddie Mulligan launching his campaign on Facebook. I think David Cullinan did as well. So you know they've been working at it for a while now, but they are election ready.
Yeah, John Cummins in earlier. He's taken his leave of absence from school. He's out. Damien Gagan was out for 5 hours the other day already. I know Mary Butler's been canvassing, so they're all out and about. So we won't go into when the time might happen. Let's presume it's going to happen anyway quite soon, and we're going to talk specifically about Waterford. Kieran Foley, how do you see the Waterford constituency playing out?
I think overall, Damien, I'd envisage that we'd be likely probably to return more or less the same in terms of one Fianna Fáil, one Fine Gael, one Sinn Féin and one independent at present. Obviously, the hospital issue is going to be major again here in Waterford. I would hope that it doesn't become a political football as it has become in the past, and even most recently with the local elections. I'm sure for Fianna Fáil that infamous image of their party members outside the hospital in 2016 with Mulhall Martin is going to come back and haunt them on a number of occasions.
Is that not in the past now?
No, well, I'm sure many of their opponents will be keen to resurrect that on social media and ensure that as many people as possible see it again, Damien. I suppose it is interesting. The hospital will dominate, but we've heard discussion about the airport also this morning. Yeah. That's another issue which is going to come into play. The North Quays, generally the treatment of Waterford, are we anywhere different to where we were in February 2016?
Okay. There's some of the issues. Let's talk about some of the people, I suppose, Mary Frances, the personalities that we have there. What's your view about who's going to run, who's being declared? Obviously, we haven't full declarations yet. We've got two Fine Gaelers that are going to be running, Damien Geoghegan and John Cummins.
Yeah, Fine Gael's is an interesting playing pitch now because it's going to be completely rewritten. We've no more John Deise, no Paddy Coffey running. So... And you've got a lot of very enthusiastic chomping at the bit there. John Cummins in the city, Damien Geoghegan down in Dungarvan. And there's even talk now of Liam Brazel being put on the ticket as well. Which, whether Fine Gael, I think they will have a bit of a fight just to get one seat. So why they would put three on the ticket. But it could be just a strategy to prop up each other, to get over the mark. In
the fall of Mary Butler and Eddie Mulligan.
Yeah. Mary Butler would have to be fairly confident. She topped the poll the last time out, and she, hasn't been hiding away. She's been very vocal, on her platform. She'd be quite conservative, rural vote, very standard Fianna Fáil. So I'd say she could be quite confident. Eddie Mulligan is absolutely ambitious. To get a TD position, but he'll be in with a hard slog. David Cullinan would have to be confident. Traditionally, there seems to be a kind of a rural city divide in voting in recent years, anyway. So, and also a left-right. So you could say you'll see 2 seats for the left and 2 seats for the right, with the left, David Cullinan, having solidified that kind of what would have traditionally been workers, Labour, Sinn Féin, and he has that sewn up pretty well.
And we'll talk about the Greens in a second. Liz, I'm going to come to you in a second. Johnny O'Connor. Johnny, in terms of the quotas and in terms of reading these down through the years, what's your take on it?
Well, we'll need to know exactly who's going, and there's a couple of question marks. As far as I know, John Halligan still hasn't declared, and if he goes, I reckon he'll have to have a good chance. If he doesn't, there's an awful lot of number ones will be up for grabs. As Mary Frances said, it's the first time in nearly 40 years that there hasn't been an Austin Deise or a John Deise running. Now, Austin, he obviously was Fine Gael, but he had a farming vote, and that crossed party boundaries. And another thing that Austin had, and John had, and the late Jackie Fahey had as well, they had a good, strong base in the city. And if you take that 2/3 of the electorate is, coming Dungarvan back the way, but yet the West is very important. So I think we'll have to see who is going. Another interesting thing is, I think for the first time since the late Eddie Collins, John Cummins will be the only Fine Gael candidate in the city. Eddie Collins was, but now then there was Eddie Collins and Catherine Babulia, and then Morris ran on 3 occasions, but he's the only city candidate. It'll be interesting to see, does the Redmondite tradition really still exist?
Liz, what's your take on it?
Yeah, because in West Waterford, since the foundation of the state, has always returned candidate, and in some cases, as Johnny said, 2 candidates. And, in 1977, Austin Deise was elected, and then his son John, and Jackie Fahey was also Ciara Conway. So sometimes they returned too. So looking at that, I'd say Damien Geoghegan is very safe. Liam Brazel still hasn't announced whether he'll run or not. We asked him again last night. He says he still hasn't made his mind up. He got a call on Christmas Eve from Fine Gael headquarters, which, I just find unusual that they will run three, because they've two strong candidates. But Liam Brazel, I suppose, would be seen as a Deise supporter, and John Deise would still have a lot of support in Dungarvan and West Waterford. His office is still one of the busiest. So John Halligan, as far as I know, is not standing. But an independent...
He hasn't made any announcement yet,
He hasn't made any announcement, but he has indicated that he won't be.
And if he doesn't run, their talk was that there would be a Halligan name going on the ticket. That would be Brendan Halligan. But if there's...
Or it could be one of the independent councillors like Joe Kelly or Joe Conway.
Potentially. But if, for example, Brendan Halligan doesn't run, like if the Halligan name is not on it, then there won't be a Halligan name on the ticket. That, again, throws it wide open.
Yeah.
Oh, it definitely does. Mark O'Casig from the Green Party, first time out in Tramore in the last local elections, topped the poll. A lot of green issues on the agenda at the moment and topping the agenda. So with transfers, I think he would be very transfer friendly.
Yeah, and we talk about John Pratt as well in Labour. Just going to take a quick few little messages, and we'll talk about the transfers and how it's going to actually play out just after this. Now, welcome back. You're joined by Kieran Foley, Mary Francis. We are joined by Johnny O'Connor and Liz Reddy. Mary Francis, Ryan, what were you just saying? You agree with Johnny and Liz in terms of how it's going to be playing out?
The rural/west vote returning, most likely Geoghegan, with Brazel backing that seat. But
John Pratt is an imponderable. Labour Party, as Johnny says, we've got the Kine factor, we've got the O'Shea factor in Tramore, we've got 4 Labour councillors. John Pratt is well liked. He's a nice guy.
Yeah.
You just wouldn't know. Would he be in a chance for the last seat?
He's tallow, so I think that West vote will end up going to Geoghegan. I think, he'll be in a fight for the last seat, but that last seat to me is wide open. I think independents could figure strongly in the last seat. If John Halligan runs, he will still be in contention, even though he would be seen to not have delivered very effectively for Waterford, particularly on the hospital issue. But the Halligan machine is very, very strong in terms of constituency work and vote getting. But if he doesn't step in, the big question is Matt Shanahan. Will he run the poll topper in the local elections?
I met him before Christmas and asked him was he running, and he said he hadn't made up his mind. And in past experience, that means a yes in my book.
I think you should remember too, though,
Johnny.
I think you should remember with John Halligan, I wouldn't rule him out yet. I really wouldn't. But I think that I think that's why Fine Gael are running a third candidate. I think they think he may not run, and
well, they haven't announced yet they're running a third candidate. But if they do decide,
well, they've asked.
Yeah.
But
it may not happen.
I think Fine Gael, they may be optimistic, but I think they see a slim chance of getting 2 seats, which would be difficult.
And is that why they would run Liam Brazel then, do you think?
Because if John Halligan didn't run, there's more city number ones available. And again, don't ever forget, an awful lot of people, when they go into a ballot box, if they're not committed party people or for candidates, they'll vote for someone lives nearby or in their area, and that's there.
And I think with Liam Brazel, if you look at the results of the local elections, himself and Shawnee Power really swept the boards in the Comra or the Portlaw Kilmacthomas area, as it's also referred to as. They really performed strongly in the local
Liam
elections.
Did perform very strongly, even though he'd lost half of his.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean,
area.
there were some concerns.
Can I just mention one other thing that I suppose people they won't want to hear, and maybe they'll be surprised. And we're talking about the hospital situation. We're talking about the airport. In fairness to John Halligan, if he hadn't been there, the airport would probably be gone by now. But people, when it comes to a general election, despite all the things that are happening, I always remember, I learned a hard lesson back in the tax marches. The tax marches in Waterford were some of the biggest ever. The streets weren't big enough to hold them, and there was people walking up from all walks of society, walking up the quay with fire in their eyes.
But it didn't reflect in the ballot box.
There was a general election a short time after, and I think there was less than 0.5 of 1% of a change. So while we're all, I mean, if you were to vote on what's happening in Waterford, you'd never vote for Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael or Labour ever.
But let's presume Matt Shanahan is going to run on the basis that there's still obviously issues to do in his work. He hasn't announced anything yet. He might run, maybe. He hasn't said that he's not going to go. If he goes into the fold, that takes a whole new thing about it. It also means that transfers become even more vital. Like, for example, one wouldn't want to be David Cullinan fighting for the last seat with the Greens.
Yeah.
Because the Greens would be very transfer friendly, Sinn Féin not be. But David Cullinan would hope that he'd be in first or second place.
I would see David Cullinan, now, I mean, I wouldn't bet on it, but I would see him being fairly strong, you know, given his record. I think that fourth seat, if Matt Shanahan runs, I think it will really put the hospital at the forefront of issues. And I think that will probably, and nothing against the Greens, but I think that when people vote in general elections, they think more locally, even than, say, voting in European elections. And I think that the local issues that affect their own home, like hospital and healthcare, will trump environment, even though the Greens will probably do quite well. But I don't think they'll do well
You'd
enough.
imagine that there is a huge potential vote there for Matt Shanahan, and also it is interesting that we have another hospital-based candidate in the independent candidate Bernadette Phillips,
yes,
and a female candidate obviously as well, and she does have quite a high profile herself.
Yep.
She's involved in many different community groups. She has been closely associated with the cardiac campaign. She has quite an active and presence on social media, and I spoke last night as well actually with Kieran Hartley, who of course is a former Fianna Fáil member. He ran as a Fianna Fáil candidate in the 2014 European elections as a running mate for Brian Crowley in Ireland South.
Go on.
And he confirmed his intentions to put his name forward for the general election, and he says that as an independent candidate, and he says
he got a very good vote.
He got a very good vote, and he would have quite a high profile, and he says the three pillars of his campaign will focus on business, farming and energy. And I do think as well, picking up on one of those points, the farming issue, which we were speaking about Fine Gael and the rural vote, and obviously the Deises and the background there with agriculture, and we mentioned that the fact there is no DC name on the ballot does leave a big hole, and certainly for that farming vote, I would see that that's where Fine Gael are looking to the likes of Liam Brazel, because even though Damien Gagan might be classed as kind of rural based because he's west, he's still an urban candidate with Dungarvan, and then you have the urban candidate in John Cummins in the city. So certainly there's a huge potential to capitalise on the farming vote in Waterford.
There is also the cross-class pollination, for example. You're going to have People Before Profit, you're going to have the Workers' Party just phoned in to say they're going to run a candidate, not announcing who it's going to be yet, and then who they are going to put their second transfers to. So, for example, would a so-called lefty vote for the Greens? Are we looking at the Greens getting up there higher up?
Damien, you know, you've been at the counts.
Yeah.
You cannot, like, the way people vote at local elections, general elections, it goes all over the place. And, you know, every general election, we go out on the doorsteps with the candidates, and it always amazes me. The issues that come up, they're not the big issues. They're the lights in the street. It's council issues, really, that they're that concern them, or their pocket. It always amazes me that the university issue doesn't come up on the doorsteps.
I think maybe the non-committed voter will be looking and saying, well, who might become a minister if they're elected. And really, that's the crux. And I've been hammering this for years. Nobody is against Waterford. It's not that everybody up the country has it in for us. We just haven't had the ministers. If you look at Galway, Limerick and Cork, since the foundation of the state, they've had a succession of ministers, and the way that government works in this country, the government ministers, they have to go back to their constituencies and they look after their constituencies. And Waterford has been, apart from us and Deise, the last time we really featured in anything big was when Martin Cullen was there. And until we have a senior minister at the cabinet table, we'll always be after the crumbs.
I completely agree.
We've got 1 minute left. Sharon's texted him, what about the fishermen? What about unemployment? What about transfers, Gagan? Deise's vote won't go to Gagan. I'm going to give you each 20 seconds. Name the 4 TDs in the next Dáil. Kieran Foley, 4 TDs, next Dáil for Waterford, go.
I would say...
just want names, 4 names.
Okay, Mary Butler, David Culnan, Matt Shanahan, if he puts his name forward, and possibly John Cummins.
Mary Francis.
Mary Butler, Damien Gagan, David Cullinan, Matt Shanahan.
Johnny O'Connor.
I'd say Mary Butler, I would say David Cullinan, John Cummins, and I couldn't really go for the fourth one. I don't know.
Liz.
Okay, Fianna Fáil's Mary Butler, Fine Gael Damien Gagan, Sinn Féin's David Cullinan. Mark O'Casey, Green Party, I think might surprise people.
Thank you very much for calling into us. Really appreciate it. A lot of people saying an interesting chat. One person saying we're going to be hearing too much of this over the next month. You don't want to hear about it. You better believe it. Now, folks, thanks very much, everybody, for commenting this morning. Thanks for your views. Thanks to our panel for coming in for that discussion. Thanks to Julie for producing. And Jeff is up next. I think he's from our Dungarvan studio. I want to wish Jeff the very best down in Dungarvan. Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you on Monday morning.